So this is a question for Christopher. You mentioned Mohsen Moussawi's recent book, and I wonder if, thinking along the lines of Shahab Ahmad's recent book, What is Islam, from a couple of years ago, where he makes a similar argument about the importance of thinking about this period from 1200 to 1800 as a joint, as a single cultural space. But for Shahab, the most important language in that space is Persian. So have you thought about how, Arabic alongside Persian in this cultural zone, and if there are areas, are there distinct areas that Arabic reigned and Persian did not, and vice versa? Or how do you think about this?
Okay, thanks for that question. That's a great question, and I've been trying to think about it. I haven't read the second book which you mentioned, but that's usually the question you encounter, because especially in South Asia, the study of Persian and Persian-related cultural practices has always dominated. And usually you get this division into, we have Arabic applied for religious purposes and Persian is applied for the courtly context. And I'm making this argument especially for this connection between the Deccan and the Red Sea region, and there you can see other fields where the Arabic is applied, for example, in history writing. So again, you have similar communities which circulate, they start writing Arabic biographical works in the Deccan and in Gujarat in order to refer to the fact that they belong to a larger transoceanic community in this area. Again, when I look at the manuscripts, most of the notes or the studying notes are in Persian, but nonetheless Arabic existed next to the Persian. And when you look into Oriental libraries across South Asia, it's almost a 50-50 amount of manuscripts. So half of it is Persian, the other half is Arabic. So it's a great question to think about, but I can't say anything about what Arabic as a language would mean all across India. That's too large. Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you, Mariam, for this great paper. And if we are to find the missing link of Katrina Bori for the 12th and 13th century, this is a good starting point for sure. My question is, it is often said about Ibn ʿAbd al-Salām that عِلْمُهُ يَفُوق تصانيفه, or his knowledge is not reflected by his works. What do you think of this, and why do you think they say it? I couldn't find any explanation for that.
Thank you. I think we're both a little bit partial towards Ibn ʿAbd al-Salām here. Yeah, I think, so I am trying to read through all of his works to kind of get a better sense of how he sees his project and what he's involved in. There's a few of his works that are lost, which would kind of illuminate the larger picture a little bit. So he has a kind of a work on Shafi'i Furur, which joins between the Hawi and the Nihaya, which are each like 20 volumes, which has been lost, if he even completed it. So something like that would give us a better sense of how he thinks as a jurist. So yeah, I think that might be the case. The way I'm approaching this is to also look at the kind of anecdotal evidence about how he thinks and how he taught in the biographical historical chronicles, and also the works of his students, because they were much more prolific than him. So Abu Shama, for example, there's just a lot of random anecdotes about his life in some manuscripts I saw recently, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, Qarafi. So I'm hoping that by digging into their works, I can get a better sense of not just his thought, but also his persona, because he clearly has one. So that's what and if you have any leads, I'd be very interested. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Question for Torsten and for Ahmed. Torsten, you've been addressing one of the questions which is bugging us continuously, i.e. that some works are just not copied and that we only have one or very few copies of them. And your answer to that question was to argue that there was not really a need for copies, if I get you right, because these were very accessible in terms of the placement within the city, but also in terms of the way of how they were organized. So people didn't really need to copy them, if I got you right. But I wonder whether for Ibn Tulun, and that is probably true for all these old Hanbali men hanging out in Salahiyya, that many of the works, there was not really a point in copying them, because they were very often hadith collections which were very personal, where the enactment of the transmission was the main point, and subsequent generations, if they were interested, had their own transmission lines and produced their own copy. So that the very high percentage of autograph works which we get out of the Salahiyya milieu, and it's striking, obviously not only Ibn Tulun, it's across the board that we have very many autographs out of this milieu, is very much bound to the specific way of how hadith were transmitted. For Ahmed, you compared your sama'at to the sama'at which Chamberlain analyzed. I'm not really sure which corpus is Chamberlain analyzing here. It's just that I'm not aware that basically where he's conducting this work and what kind of sama'at, what is the nature of the corpus.
In general, yes. Like I took that out of the presentation, but like I can definitely say that there is more than 100 works on hadith written by Ibn Tulun. And in this, is this working anyway? No? Like this? So there is more than 100. I counted more than 100 works on hadith, and I would say yes. In a different, like if we take the long-term perspective, like even most of the editions of Ibn Tulun's works are done by Damascene scholars. So this is like, until today, this is actually like a very local tradition. And just that now those scholars have, like since the 1900s, they have to go to Cairo, to the Taimuriyya to do these editions, but it's still a very local tradition. And I would still say, yes, it is accessible for most of the people that are interested in that. And you're right, there's like Ibn Abd al-Hadi is the same. But I want to point out also the additional value, and you're right in saying that there are other things involved apart from the information in the books. And I think that's also important, because like basically the Abu Ummah Madrasa becomes this host of the old past, both of Salahiyya and of Mamluk Damascus. And I think as such, it's kind of a treasure trove that just stays there. But I would say that as such, it also kind of becomes or remains an institution in a way, like in a very different way. Like the books remain accessible. One example that I didn't mention is Ibn Kanan, who talks about getting books out of this library in the 18th century. So it's still there. This also is important in case of Ibn Tulun, because it actually enables scholars, or not scholars, let's say writers or copyists, to make copies at a later stage. There is a number of, there is one majmu'ah that is made by a scholar that goes then to Aleppo at the turn of the 16th century, which includes 3 of his works. And then after Nabulsi's statement, there is kind of a small surge in copying activities in the 17th and 18th centuries. And those are works that are not necessarily the works that earlier biographers mentioned among his best works. There's one on divination by movements of the body, and then there is especially his Dale, and not his original biographic dictionary, but the Dale, which of course is important because it sets in at the beginning of the Ottoman era and says something about people who, basically it founds new silsilas and isnads and lineages, and I think that's why that becomes important.
All right, just something I have to say to save myself any embarrassment. I read Chamberlain, Petrie, and Berkey in the same day. So, but I'm pretty sure I'm talking about Chamberlain. He used the sama'at for Tarikh Dimashq of Ibn Asakir. That was read over several months these sama'at contain, I mean, hundreds of people. What?
You mean Persian?
I'm confusing people, no?
Maybe he can clarify.
All right. Which I'm confused. Lack of sleep and reading all of these books at the same day. Is it you who was using Ibn
If it's Ibn Asakir, then it's probably...
Ibn Asakir, that's you. All right, then.
I was just wondering what Chamberlain is using.
Then I don't remember. So I tried to save myself the embarrassment. I did not. But yeah, I'm referring to that because as I was saying, I was trying to define my topic. That is the history of the book. And when I saw the sama'at, I thought, how can I handle this? What's the information embedded here? And dealing with knowns, unknowns, askari, civilian, scholarly, not scholarly, I thought, all right, that's an approach, although I'm not getting the same results, or I don't have the same number of people with names written with clarity, the same clarity. And here I have actually a question to the audience that they can address after they finish their question to the panel. I'm very puzzled by this sama'at thing. Two things. Is it a slice of society, or is it a random group of people? The second question is, what goes into the mind of a teacher in order to determine what book to transmit? I've just been thinking, why did Ibn Khalil al-Dimashqi choose Ibn Sa'd's Tabaqat to transmit over several months? All right.
My question was for Torsten. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about the ijazah that you pointed out. And I also wondered, you mentioned teaching. I wondered if there was something in the ijazah, I couldn't read the image very well, that's something that specifically mentioned teaching.
Yes, it's basically the same remark on like that Ibn Tulun gave an ijazah to us of the whole volume. I have found that twice, and in these cases you don't find it in the for the individual text. It just states he gave us an ijazah for the whole text. Right. And I would say that this is also the handwriting of Akmal ad-Dīn ibn Muflih. I would place it there with him, but that is, yes, I would say that. I have found recently, thanks to Danilo, who's helped me very much in obtaining Cairene manuscripts that came slow when I was there. Another work where actually you find the same remark, just corresponding to a work on makamas actually, and where I can place it more precisely to Ibn Muflih, because he also adds a title page in his very cursive handwriting. And regarding the teaching context, I can only recommend the Dhahar al-Qasr. There is so much on teaching with dates and with place and with content, and referring to yours. I think that Ibn Tulun either teaches his own ta'aliqat, as he calls them, some of them, and they sometimes have a connection to the place where they are taught, and then he teaches the what is it called, Silsila bil Awliya, on authority of members of the Banu Fahd, and probably also other Damascene scholars. But here's an ijazah of that. There is an edited work on the on ijazahs and sama'at connected to Ibn Tulun, some that he got and some that others got from him, if that's interesting to you.
Yeah, I would just suggest following the Usul Hadith works, as well as the work of people who have looked at ijazahs like Devin Stewart, unless there's some qualification, if it's just ijazana or something like this, it's probably ijazat riwaya and not something else.
Yes, I would guess that's true. And there is an issue, and I don't remember where I read that actually like the ijazas that he himself had were lost during the first or second Ottoman conquest, and that some of his writing activity can be explained by that he tried to reclaim those things, but I don't know much about that.
Other questions?
So a question for Mariam. You noted the competitiveness of the Shafis in the 14th century, or following on from Ibn Abd al-Salām, and how they wouldn't cite each other. And what's driving all of that? What is the socio-political context that you think might be leading to that kind of behavior?
Yeah, I think it's the standard things we've seen in other periods as well, just competition over appointments, judgeship, especially, I mean, the larger question is why legal maxims, why now? There's definitely a judicial function and a pedagogical function. So that's what they're generally used for, teaching, and then as sort of an index to the madhab of sorts. So I think that's the larger context. And then there's, appointments and then removals from various positions and replacements. So I don't think there's anything beyond that in that particular context. And then also, I mean, they're sharing a lot of students at the same time as well, so there's kind of competition over scarce resources, basically.
It's coming around to you.
It was just a comment, actually, for Mariam's paper, because I think there's something you said at the end really connects well with a point that I really liked. I mean, the central argument of Adam's paper earlier today, the notion of a system, a literary intellectual system where people have to distinguish themselves vis-a-vis their contemporaries and their immediate predecessors by writing works that are recognizable within a generic system, within a genre. And I mean, it accounts for a lot of the literary intellectual production of the period, that you have more and more people in the system, in the educational system, who are competing for resources, so there are genuine stakes. And they do that, they can't just strike off on their own and write things that are totally unrecognizable. They have to write things that are recognizable as certain types of things. And that just reminds me of this point that Adam made that I think is really interesting about why we see so many works like the Nuzul. Anyway, it was just a comment. I think those two papers speak well to each other.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And then on the other hand, though, the idea of like writing something brand new, that's what Ibn Abd al-Salām's doing, right? This ikhtara, a new genre. And this whole idea of persona, for me, he doesn't come from a scholarly family. He's always getting himself in trouble, fighting with like establishment scholars like Ibn Salah. So there's a question of whether his background gives him the impetus to just write something brand new as well. So it cuts both ways, but thank you for that comment.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Oh,
I have a question to Christopher about, you mentioned fihristation, I think you said, connected to a shift in book composition in the 17th century, if I'm right. I think it's the first time I hear that in this connection, fihristation. Can you say something more about that? Did you find that in your corpus only, or is it an established notion? And how does it compare to, how is it different from very detailed tables of content in earlier works in the beginning of the books that you find in the beginning, which are very detailed with also page numbers, etc.? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. It's just a term that came up when I talked to one of my supervisors at SOAS. And it's something that I'm only trying to trace within this corpus of manuscripts from the 15th to the 17th centuries, which survive in libraries across the Deccan, Gujarat, and then the texts I found there, which I also tried to trace down in Istanbul and Cairo. And what struck me at that point is that especially with grammar works, you can't find fihrists for the 15th and I would say till the first half of the 16th century, and then the late 16th century and especially the 17th century, they all come up with fihrists, and especially fihrists which come with their own colophons. And very often the colophons contain a different name to the actual owner of the manuscript. So at that point I thought it's something which is produced by a scribe later on in order to make this work usable. But I wouldn't claim that that's something that goes beyond that region, because this is just, well, the corpus is, I can't really delineate it any further for you, but that's the corpus I looked at, and that's where I claim it, grammar works mainly and rhetoric maybe.
I have a question for Mariam, and it also sort of touches upon what Elias just said, namely putting things in a certain jacket, I guess. Now, I'm no expert in fiqh, but I used to be a bit interested in the early Maliki school, and I read a big part of Omar Farouk Abdullah's book about the formation of the early Maliki school and their methodology. And he's quite harsh towards the Shafi'is in a sense, because he explains that for the Ahnaf and the Shafi'iyya, this aspect of maslaha is much more, they are much more aware of the importance of maslaha than the Shafi'is, and the Shafi'is rely much more on hadith. So I was wondering, for your author, you mentioned that it was quite innovative the way he produced this book, whether you could say that perhaps he was influenced by other madhabs, or and how he was able to put this in a Shafi'i shape, so to say.
So maybe next year's paper will be on this topic. This is the chapter I haven't written yet. I've been kind of reading around it. So specifically on the issue of like influence from other madhabs, I can say that in his Qawāʿid al-Kubra, he often, when he does depart from the Shafi'i school, which he does quite often for a Shafi'i jurist in this time, it's often to champion a Maliki view and quoting directly from Imam Malik. So I've kind of compiled this list of his divergences from the madhab and how he legitimizes them or what sources he's citing. So that might be a part of it, but I think I'm also interested in the larger sort of social political circumstances. He has some fatwa as well. So I'm looking at the way in which he's reasoning some of those fatwa, because often, again, departing from the madhab without much explanation, but it seems to be in light of this, like, just social utility, like, the circumstances with, like, the Mongol invasions is just women can't wait that long to remarry or whatever. Like, he's not actually going into a lot of reasoning, but he's giving these fatwas. So, and then there's a larger question of, within the kind of genealogy of Ghazali, well, Juwayni, Ghazali, Razi, and then Ahmadi. He's a student of al-Ahmadi, and I still don't know what that actually means for him. But, I mean, maslaha is being discussed in a more theoretical discourse at this time in Bab al-Qiyas and Usul al-Fiqh and what have you. And he's the first person I've seen kind of take that out of that particular context and discuss it as a genre or an issue or kind of a concept on its own. So, yeah, I'm trying to read everything he's written to get a sense of what he's doing exactly. But I would also, I mean, going back to Muhammad's question, I was thinking, I don't think he's as important as I'm making him out to be, in as much as like modern contemporary thinkers, Muslim thinkers, they want to kind of make it seem like he's very important because he's unique. But I would say that the kind of standard Shafi'i paradigm in Usul, Razi, Ahmadi, and others, and the madhab itself kind of eclipses any unique, innovative things Ibn Abd has to say. So, yes.
I think we have time maybe for one more question, if there are any. Okay, if not, before we thank the panel, I just wanted to mention one last thing, which is that the theme of this panel, which is transmission of knowledge, is also the theme of a working group that's a joint project between the French and the Germans called DINTRAN. You can Google it, DYNTRAN, so Dynamics of Transmission. And this project has quite an active website with working papers, and a number of its participants and affiliates are here today, including Christopher and Torsten, but as well as Zurinx and Conrad, and Nicola. So I would encourage you to check out the website. There's a working paper every month going back for the last 12 months or so, and the group is quite active through next year. So I'd encourage you to check that out. So it's dintran.hypothesis.org. All right, thank you very much.